Sermon of the week, Bones. Not sure about this, he said, wiping the dusty sweat from his brow. His receding hairline had allowed his forehead to become burned by the blazing sun. "Oh, what, sir?" his companion said. He, too, was mopping his brow. He lost his balance and nearly fell off his perch on the top of a large camel. He regained it and urged the reluctant animal forward. They all could see a long, slow grade in the distance. It was nearly 4 p.m., and they decided to spend the night at the peak once they reached the top of the grade. The daytime temperature was nearly 100 degrees, and the man and his companion feared they might not make it to the top of the rise. They would do everything in their power to make it. "Why are we on this trek, sir?" "King's order. Old Neb wanted me to be a liaison between his kingdom and the Orient. Though he didn't say he has some suspicions about the Orient, he is concerned they might be a threat to his kingdom from the east. Sir, we've traveled nearly 3,000 miles, and I haven't seen one soldier, not one. There is no threat out here in no man's land." The two had hooked up with a large caravan traveling the Silk Road to China. "When did we leave the cool waters of the Shabar?" the lead man asked. "I think it's been about 6 months. How many miles a day?" 15 or 20. "Then we should arrive in the next few weeks. I got these papers to their leader. I wish there was some way to communicate back to Babylon. We could send a note with the next caravan." "Yeah, let's do that." The caravan and the 2 men from Babylon finally reached the crest of the hill just as the sun was setting on the horizon behind them. Smiles came to all, as before them lay a beautiful oasis shaded by palm trees and cooled by several pools. The 2 men, along with the others in the caravan, set up tents for the night. The companion went over to check with the leader. He soon returned and reported, "The leader of the caravan said we'll camp here for a few days, as the heat is supposed to let up and it will give us all time to recover." "Oh, good. I was hoping to look around this country a bit." "No, I've been told there are dragons in the Orient. I'd like to see one." "The hand of the Lord was upon me and carried me out in the spirit of the Lord and set me down in the midst of the valley, which was full of bones, and caused me to pass by them round about. And behold, there were very many in the open valley, and they were very dry." Ezekiel 37, 1 and 2. The book written by the prophet Ezekiel is probably the most difficult of all the books in the Bible to understand and assimilate. It begins with what many interpreters believe are alien encounters that the prophet had. While in captivity along with his Judean brethren in the land of Babylon, the year determined to be 593 BC, he states he had a vision in which he saw creatures with 4 different faces and wheels within wheels that followed these creatures wherever they went. To this day, some 2,500 years later, no one has given a plausible explanation as to what these creatures and wheels represent. Alien life forms traveling with some type of spacecraft is probably now the most widely accepted theory. Ezekiel's book is filled with a plethora of stories and visions. He recounts Israel's wretched past, which has led them to where they are, Babylonian captivity. But for reasons that defy logic yet mimic history, then begins to tell the story of how they will be released from their captivity just 70 years after it began. He details their evil ways, their abominable actions, their failure to return to civilized living, yet after 70 years, God seems to have some regret for allowing Israel to become captive. He does not say that they repented. In fact, chapter 36 repeats over and over that it is not because of Israel's change of heart or sudden return to goodness that he'll release them. "Thus saith the Lord God, I do not do this for your sakes, O house of Israel, but for mine holy name's sake." Ezekiel 36:22. "Not for your sakes do I this, saith the Lord God." Ezekiel 36:32. He makes it clear to Israel that he knows they've not changed. They're still just as evil as they always were and had become 70 years earlier and long before that. It's as if God had some seminal moment. If someone turned on the light, God suddenly realizes the only chance to save humanity from total alienation from him, which equals complete destruction of humanity, is that he must somehow get Israel to stand up to the world again. They're the only people that ever believed in him as God of the universe since the flood. At that time, only 8 humans believed in God, or maybe only 1, Noah himself. In any event, by the skin of their teeth, humanity survived. Now it appears God is again running out of true believers. He realizes he must again take drastic measures or humanity will self-destruct. There'll be no need for the beautiful plan of salvation through Jesus Christ. as there be no humans to save. Nebuchadnezzar, Cyrus, Alexander, or Caesar will no doubt concoct ways to destroy all human life, most likely through endless wars. So God devises a new plan. Now our God is depicted in the Bible, is depicted in nature, is understood by the human experience, including mine, is all-knowing, all-seeing, all-caring. He's not someone who needs some seminal moment, some watershed experience, some crisis point to happen which leads him to decision time. He's always been and always knows what will happen. He knows the future. He doesn't predict it. He knows it. So why is he letting Israel off the hook? Why is he restoring a nation which has failed, which is as corrupt as any in the world, which is incapable of sustaining itself? Only answer I can come up with is he's not doing it for Israel. He's doing it to preserve humanity, to preserve civilization. Remember our verse, Ezekiel 36:22. I do not this for your sake, but for mine holy name's sake. What he's saying is that he knows you fail, but I also know that you are the only one that can possibly succeed, albeit with my help. In other words, you, Israel, an evil, corrupt nation, still deep down are salvageable. That is, if I help you. God knew Israel was the only nation in all his world that even remotely believed he was God. Deep down they believed, but were simply incapable of sustaining a kingdom, a civilization, and humanity at all. Kingdom after kingdom had fallen by the wayside. First Eden, then Egypt, then Canaan, then the northern kingdom of Israel, then Assyria, then Judah, then now Babylon, which we know fell to Medo-Persia in 535 BC after seeing the handwriting on its walls. Mene, Tekel, Upharsin, Daniel 5:25. So what's God saying to Ezekiel, a captive in Babylon? What's he doing? Reiterating what he has said from day one, from that fateful day in Eden when Eve took the first bite. He's saying he knows man alone is incapable of sustaining his own life. He's also speaking to the angels of the universe, but what he is also saying is that he has a plan. He has a solution. He has a son who's willing and able to save men and angels from destruction. He created them all, and for his holy name's sake, he is going to save all those who believe in him as the true God. See John 3:16. Question I want to ask him if I have the opportunity to meet God in the earth made new is this: why would you create a life form that you know is going to betray you and require an intricate plan to preserve that life form? I'm sure I'll never be able to understand the answer, but I'm still glad he created us. Genesis 1:31 gives us a hint. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. Like an artist, he was proud of his work, but notice two things. He didn't say it was excellent or perfect. He said it was good. Also in Genesis 1:26, he says, let us make man in our own image. I wonder who he's talking to. He doesn't say, I will make. He says, let us make in our image. This implies plural. Questions for another day. Back to our stars. Boy, this food tastes good. Yeah, it hits the spot, but nothing like we eat back in Shabar. No, but it hits that spot. I just wish I could get some good kosher beef. They wouldn't let us make any there. We've been sinning since we got to Babylon. I guess, but we did try. At least I did. Trying's not enough, son. We must also ask God to help us whenever things get rough. That's where we blew it. We'd still be eating kosher food if we had just relied on God. All that immorality, all that sacrifice, all that idol worship, and then to cap it off, we expected we could hold off massive kingdoms without God. Assyria, then Nebuchadnezzar. What idiots we are. You know, I got a friend. He's a member of Nebuchadnezzar's court. He actually talks to God. He has visions, he says. One's about different animals. Daniel, that's his name. Thinks he represents the different kingdoms, and according to him, there will be several of them in the future. How long till the next one? Doesn't know, but he has a hunch it might not be in the not-too-distant future. Say, we got a few days. The guy just ahead of us in the caravan said there are dragons up north of here. Says there's a big desert, Gobi or something they call it. Want to go see a dragon? I'm not so sure. I don't want to be lunch for a fire-eating monster. Ah, come on. We need some excitement. We'll be careful. I got this sword. Oh, all right. The word China is not mentioned in the Bible, but the word silk is mentioned 4 times. Solomon mentions it in Proverbs 31:22, and John the Revelator mentions it in Revelation 18:12. The other two are found in our buddy Zeke's book. They are both found in chapter 16. God's talking to Ezekiel. Interestingly, God repeatedly uses the term Son of Man when he speaks to Ezekiel throughout the book. Not aware of any other similar use in the Bible, except when the term is used to refer to Jesus Christ himself. Why God uses this term is not understood. Maybe he wants the world to know that the true Son of Man still exists and will come to save all humanity. In any event, Ezekiel obviously knows about silk and where it comes from. Seems to have some status in Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom. Maybe he did some envoy work for Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar was always concerned about his enemies, with good reason. Sending a nobody to the outskirts of his kingdom would have been a good way to do some reconnaissance work. After all, Daniel was prime minister, a card-carrying Hebrew. And Ezekiel would have been very happy to travel the world. In chapter 37, Ezekiel discusses one of these forays. Speaks of a journey to a valley full of bones. The hand of the Lord was upon me, and carried me out in the spirit of the Lord, and set me down in the midst of the valley, which was full of bones, and caused me to pass by them round about. And behold, there were very many in the open valley, and they were very dry. Ezekiel 37, 1 and 2. This text is the one that made Ezekiel famous. Them Bones was a Negro spiritual that was first recorded in 1928 by James Weldon Johnson and his brother J. Rosamond Johnson. It's one of the most sung spirituals and is known worldwide. Silk was first manufactured in China in 1046 BC. As we saw earlier, King Solomon knew of it in 950 BC. The Silk Road was used to export Chinese silk to the west. The road extended from the Chinese capital of Xi'an through Asia, the Middle East, and all the way to Eastern Europe. It covered some 4,350 miles. Traveling 15 to 20 miles a day, it would likely take 6 or more months to traverse it. The Chinese emperor during Ezekiel's time was Xian. I'm sure Nebuchadnezzar was concerned about any enemy, including China. The Gobi Desert is found in northern China and southern Mongolia. It consists of a 1,000-mile arc of rough, uninhabitable desert sand and badlands. It lays north of the Silk Road and primarily west of the Great Wall of China, which began to be constructed in 200 BC. 1920, archaeologists discovered massive fields of dinosaur bones, many laying right on the surface. Subsequent archaeological expeditions have identified myriad species of dinosaurs, many of them new. In 2018, further excavations in the Loess Plateau, a large area that crosses the Silk Road, were carried out. Large caches of stone tools and other evidence of human activity were discovered. These are dated to be 2.1 million years old, now thought to be the oldest evidence of human life in the world. They even predate the earliest human activity found in Africa. This debate will go on as to who was first, but it does open up another evidence of antediluvian life. Ezekiel and his companion got up early the next morning and headed toward the desert. They reached the edge of the massive sandy area by nightfall and set up their tent for the night. They slept soundly, but at daybreak were awakened by a very bright sun. They had brought plenty of water and knew it would be a very hot day. "Well, looky here," Zeke said, stooping down to pick up an object. "What you got?" "It's a bone." "Hey, here's another one." "And here's another." He looked further and realized there were hundreds of bones laying all over the place. "I wonder what these bones are from. Are they human?" Soon his companion tripped and fell face first into the sand. He brushed the sand from his face and was staring at a massive leg bone larger than himself. "Hey," he yelled. "What you got?" "I think I found your dragon, Zeke." "Maybe an elephant." "No, this is far bigger than an elephant. This has to be from some dragon." Two further explored and soon came upon a cache of bones that were clearly human, strewn all over the ground. Ezekiel sat down on another huge leg bone and stared at the amazing valley in front of him. His companion sat next to him. Both took a long drink of water. "I wonder what happened here. I'd say they were all killed by Noah's flood." "Nope, can't be. That flood would have covered all these bones or washed them away. No, something else took place here." "But what? What could have done this?" "I think it's time to ask a higher power." He closed his eyes, stared up into the bright sky, and then raised one hand and then the other. Soon he and his companion heard a musical voice that was familiar to both. Zeke kept staring upward, but his companion pulled out his little notebook and began to write. "Son of man," the musical voice said, "do you think these bones can live?" Only you, the God of the universe, can know the answer. I order you to breathe life into these dry bones, and they shall live. Zeke shook his head, but the voice repeated the order. He took a deep breath, and before their eyes the bones began to shake and rattle. Soon they began to reattach in the form of human skeletons. Then around the perfectly arranged skeletons, muscles and tendons began to appear, and within minutes human forms could be seen. Soon the human figures began to breathe and move. It was not long, and the two men with open mouths stared at an army of humans they estimated to be number 100,000 well-armed soldiers. Zeke stared up at the sky again with his hands in the air. What does this mean? Who's this army? To what captain do they belong? Why, these are your comrades. This is the new Israeli army. I'll soon restore your kingdom of Israel. It will be once again great and a respected nation. That is not two, but one nation. I'll place David as its ruler, and it will be my nation forever. Zeke stared at the army in total amazement. His companion was writing feverishly. When will this miracle occur, my lord? All in due time, son of man, the voice said. Zeke and his companion knelt and bowed. They both knew the conversation was over. The two packed up their tent and belongings and took a long drink of water. As the two stared out over the massive Gobi, they both realized God had only restored the human bones. He had not restored and given life to all the other bones laying in the desert. But they also realized that there was no longer any army. Zeke shook his head and said, I hope he restores Israel as a country in my lifetime. Not sure about that. God has his own timetable and never seems to be in a hurry. Got that right. Ready? They both heard it. What was that? Probably God forgot something. Zeke realized he had just stated an impossibility. God never forgot anything. Then they heard the sound again, louder than before. Their mouths dropped open, and they both stared at a huge fireball coming their way. Then they heard the ear-piercing screech. They both dove behind a small ridge as the fireball raced over their heads and ignited some brush. They peered over the ridge and saw it. Their eyes stared at a massive dragon with huge eyes, massive teeth, and a barbed tail. It appeared at least 60 feet long and 30 feet tall. Suddenly they heard an even more ear-piercing roar, and they saw another fireball headed their way from an even larger dragon. The two dragons were slowly walking toward the two from some 100 yards away. They were swinging their tails and roaring. In the distance they could see another pair of dragons some 500 yards to the north. That did it. The two had seen more than enough of Chinese dragons. They were now believers. They grabbed their backpacks and began to run. These three more fireballs headed their way, but they didn't look back. Finally, after a half hour, they dove behind another ridge. Panting heavily, they peered over the ridge. Shadows were lengthening, but they saw no dragon or fireballs. They waited several minutes, staring at one another in the Gobi, but finally got up and walked back toward the oasis. Neither said anything, but both decided they would say nothing about the day's events, at least not for a while. Maybe our world is really quite small after all, and our history books and teachers and scholars reveal a world largely unexplored and uninhabited. Humans tend to congregate in one place and tend to live in mild climates. The Bible tells us our world was a much milder place before the flood. Were all the fountains of the great deep broken up? Genesis 7:11. All the high hills that were under the whole heaven were covered. 15 cubits upward did the waters prevail, and the mountains were covered. Genesis 7:19 and 20. And the waters prevailed upon the earth 150 days. Genesis 7:24. Hurricane Harvey hit the Texas coast and the city of Houston in 2018. In Nederland, Texas, a town some 90 miles east of Houston, dumped 60.58 inches of rain. This is the most ever recorded in the United States. However, it did not break the record. At Folk Reunion Island in the South Indian Ocean, 71.8 inches of rain fell in a 24-hour period on January 7, 1966. Tropical storm Denise was the culprit then. However, in Genesis 7:12 it says, and the rain was upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. There's that 40 again. God likes that number for reasons unclear. However, it is the only number when written that has all of its letters fall in alphabetical order. F-O-R-T-Y. Who knows? Well, Hurricane Harvey did $125 billion of damage. What would 40 days of Hurricane Harvey do? Look around you. There's a reason most of our world is uninhabited. God destroyed it to save it. As mentioned, the word silk is mentioned 4 times in the Bible. Take a look at Isaiah 49:12. Behold, these shall come from far, and lo, these come from the north and from the west, and these from the land of Sinim. There is some question as to what the land of Sinim is, S-I-N-I-M, but the consensus seems to be it refers to China. Isaiah lived from 760 to 698 BC, a time before Babylon took Israel captive. Ezekiel lived about a century later during that captivity, 622 to 570 BC. There's evidence of Jewish presence in China in antiquity. Maybe God took him to the Gobi, or maybe Ezekiel was on that Silk Road. A Persian business letter written in 708 AD was found on the northern caravan route of the Silk Road. Early Christian tradition says that the Apostle Thomas took the gospel message to China in 64 AD. The dragon was one of the earliest Chinese gods, and as early as 2200 BC, from excavations at Lasia, a town destroyed by a volcano, there's evidence that the people worshipped a supreme god. A Chinese text written about 5 BC said there was a major star that shone bright for 70 days. Then, 13 months later, a second star shone. It could have taken the wise men this long to reach Bethlehem. You may say this is a bunch of hogwash, but the evidence is piling up. Recent DNA studies have discovered a connection between Chinese and Jews extending at least 1400 years. This fits with the Silk Road history, which was used from 100 BC onward and likely much sooner, as Solomon was born around 990 BC. The New World knew the world then and now. So what's the point of all this info and the point of Ezekiel's book? It's a worldwide evidence that the God of the universe existed and that everybody knew it. They knew of his activities, his power, his interventions, but chose to create their own gods to worship in his place. Reasons for this are very unclear, but Ezekiel demonstrates many of them in his book. He describes what Israel did, how it fell away from doing what was good for mankind and took to doing what they liked. They did what turned them on, what gave them a high, whatever suited their fancy, what they felt like. Sound familiar? Nothing changes. Man is man, and he is not alone capable of survival, of sustaining life, of doing what's good for mankind for any length of time. Adam and Eve preserved humanity for a few years. It didn't take them long to fall off the wagon. They had everything. They even lived with God. Ezekiel mourns Israel for what has become and pleads with God. You know what? God listened and already had a plan to restore Israel as a nation, but God makes no bones about it. He plainly states that it is not for Israel's sake, but for his own that he will do this. He and Ezekiel know full well that Israel and humanity hasn't changed in the least, but our God is determined to save us, even though we don't want to be saved. Ezekiel 36:22. History tells us this all happened. In fact, all countries knew of Israel and of God, but I had pity for mine holy name, which the house of Israel had profaned among the heathen, whither they went. Ezekiel 36:21. For I will take you from among the heathen, and gather you out of all countries, and will bring you into your own land. Ezekiel 36:24. Ladies and gentlemen, children, we have no excuse. Our world is a mess, and humanity never will. Nearly went extinct many times, most recently in 1945 and 1962, when the red button was almost pushed. In the words of the great British historian Kenneth Clark, we got through by the skin of our teeth. 60 years on and nothing's different. Oh, there are no more major wars, but violence and chaos are even more rampant. The solution is simple. All we have to do is look at the sky full of stars, the beauty of nature. Listen to the birds, witness the birth of a newborn, or enjoy the honesty of a child. There's only one reason for this wonderfulness. That is, the God of heaven gave it to us and keeps giving it to us in spite of our waywardness. One has to marvel at the godless atheist who can see none of this, who says it all started and goes on by itself. What he can't grasp is the fact that without God there would be nothing. But as our Bible tells us, as our Savior told us, and as our world tells us, there will be an end to waywardness. There will be an end to evil. There will be a new heaven, a new earth. John states this fact plainly in Revelation 21:1. Ezekiel uses the 48 chapters of his book to reiterate this fact. Israel is exiled but will be given a reprieve, in fact a reprieve after reprieve. God gives them a new earth repeatedly, but they cannot maintain it. They are a microcosm of humanity. Take time to study Ezekiel, study Israel, study human history. Watch the series on civilization by Kenneth Clark, available on YouTube. Your Bible spells out exactly what did happen, what is happening, and what will happen. Evil will end. Ezekiel, how long we've been back? Well, I think about 2 months. It was a long 2 years. Yeah, but it was worth it. We saw and learned a lot. Did you go before the king? Yes, I did, just last week. What'd you tell him? Well, that's kind of confidential, but I guess I can give you the gist of it. I gave him the emperor's letters and the bolts of fine gold, inlaid silk. He was amazed and appreciative. Then I told him that China offered no real threat to him or his kingdom, Babylon. He seemed a bit skeptical, but I told him China was a vast country, certainly not conquerable with any ease. He agreed. Did you tell him about the bones? No, I was going to, but just didn't seem to have the right time or place. Maybe some other time. I'm working up a little sermon on the subject. Maybe when I give it at synagogue, I'll invite him. He won't come. I'm not so sure. Yeah, that would be great. The sun was now on the horizon. I'm hungry. Let's get some supper. Good idea. Hey, what's that over there? I don't know. Let's go over and see. What is that? Now what? There's another fireball. You don't suppose one of those dragons followed us? Can't be. But look, there it is, another dragon. I'm getting out of here. Let's go. No, they're just watching. No, sit down and write. 4 of them. There are 4 dragons. No, they're men. But they have square heads and different face on each square and 4 wings. Are you writing? His friend nodded. You know, I've heard of beings like this before. Yeah, the dragons of the Gobi, they came to eat us. No, just keep writing. They're making no movement toward us. Yes, I think it was in the book the patriarch Enoch wrote. Do you remember? I read that book, but I don't remember dragons. No, but there were some people that bred with angels or some beings. I'm sure of it. I'll have to review it again. Look. They both look and their jaws dropped. Look at that. It's a wheel. Beautiful. And there's 4 of them. And there's a wheel within a wheel. There's 4 of them. But look, they're not rolling on the ground, but laying flat above the ground. They're flying like dishes or saucers or something. And look, the 4 dragons are getting in. See, you can see into their glass roofs, and there are more dragons inside. Amazing. They're kind of like horseless chariots. Oh, they're rising up. They're flying like birds. There they go. As the 2 watched, the 4 saucers shot out into the dusky sky. Soon they were out of sight. As the 2 stared upward, they could see a bright rainbow in the dark sky. They turned to look one another. You believe it? We saw it, but I don't believe it. Do you think we should tell anybody? The prophet just shook his head.